Every year without fail, I make 3 lists for myself surrounding video games. The first is simply my top 5 favourites that came out that year. The next, my top 5 that I experienced this year. And finally, what games I'm most anticipating for the following year. I usually keep these to myself or share them on Twitter if there's something in particular I want to highlight, but I thought to try something a little different this year. The latter of the 3 lists doesn't need a video at all, but the former 2, I think they could be fun to talk about, so join me as I talk about 10 of the best games I experienced this year, starting with a top 5 of games that didn't come out this year, but I first experienced them this year. Couple disclaimers that might sound obvious but are worth saying anyway. First, if I haven't played it, it obviously is not going to be on the list, so no God of War Ragnarok or Splatoon 3 or Stray, etc, etc. Only what I've played can make it. Second, it's entirely my personal list. It may sound obvious, but let me explain. Some games on here will be unarguably better on a technical level than games I then place higher than it. That's because, for one reason or another, I just enjoyed them more anyway. With that out of the way, let's begin. My top 5 games that didn't release in 2022, but I first experienced it in it instead. This year will always be the year that I discovered the magic and fun of streaming, but it was also the year I truly discovered the company known as Gust. I'd been aware of their games for a long time, and even played Atelier in 2019, but never stuck with any of their properties or kept up with them thereafter. That changed this year, and I couldn't be happier that I did, as they're now one of my favourite companies. That brings us to our first entry, Knights of Azure. An action RPG that relies on equipment and AI comrades more than actual stats and levels. I was immediately reminded of the Rido games from the mid-2000s when playing. You hunt down and enslave demons to fight alongside you, while you fight through an interconnected town playing as Arnis. You fight your way through this damned city, with curious tales and characters around each corner. It's got jank for sure, and the story isn't the most complicated one, especially once you figure it out, but Arnis' quest to save her girlfriend from her own fate is one that I got hooked into anyway, thanks to the sheer fun factor of the combat that eventually allows you to rotate between 5 weapons, each with their own moveset, special effects and super attacks. Exploration in this interconnected city map, with several dungeons and bosses hidden away, multiple endings based on how lovey-dovey you are with your girlfriend, and an amazing Castlevania-inspired gothic rock soundtrack. The game is simple but effective. It's just a shame the sequel that would have been the better game is held back by technical problems, letting Arnis continue to maintain her demonic crown. I was debating for a while if this even counts for the list, since I technically have played it before, but put it down at the time. It was just that I came back and actually finished it this year after growing a new appreciation for the style and story this game has. This is Ghost Runners, a cyberpunk-era game with a mirror-edge momentum platforming focus and countless combat techniques to clear rooms of enemies, sometimes without even touching the ground. It's short and arcadey, but the replay value and gameplay loop hold this title proudly in this top 5. I hope this isn't the last time we see this franchise, because I'm already hungry for more. I just hope they don't borrow the Mirror's Edge style anymore, otherwise the sequel won't be worth the hype I feel for it. But joking aside, I would say this game is easy to learn, hard to master, but it does actually take a while to learn. Parrying bullets feels like a cool trick to pull off once or twice early on, but eventually you'll reach a point where hitting it will be the only way to save the situation, and then you learn just how tight it can really be. Extra unlockable skills help ease some of this, but ultimately, this game is a test of raw skill for the most part, and can be punishing if you can't keep up. But once you do figure it out though, the sky is the limit. Picking an Atelier game I played this year that wasn't Sophie 2, since that did come out this year, was harder than I thought it would be. Even though I rank Atelier Lydie and Sully higher than the other Atelier games I've played, Sophie 1 was still what led me to trying everything that came after, and still has the best soundtrack of the bunch. But ultimately, yeah, I have to give this to Lydie and Sully. The final chapter of the mysterious trilogy before Sophie 2 turned it into a saga, this game is a turn-based JRPG that is built almost entirely for those who played those first 2 games of the trilogy, while still leaving enough legroom for those who haven't to enjoy it. Seeing characters from previous entries age and mature, while the newcomers continue the themes and challenge them in ways the others simply couldn't, all while having a far greater story focus, a refined alchemy system that more easily encourages experimentation, while adding more layers to let you push the boundaries of your creativity, all accompanied by a gorgeous soundtrack that bounces off some of the most lovable characters in an Atelier game that I've ever played. It's a recipe for excellence that should not be skipped, especially considering some of the dungeon design in this game. If you haven't played Sophie and Furious, I would still absolutely recommend trying those games first. They are fun and they're cheeky and they're not too long for JRPGs. But Lily and Sully does take the dungeons as well to a whole new level those games simply couldn't, because of the mysterious paintings, where these designed worlds entirely built off the idea of they're drawn can be fully explored. So any reasonable restriction that would be present in other games or other worlds doesn't apply here. It's if someone can draw it, you can travel it. So it opens the door majorly to far more creative dungeons, and I think the game does a wonderful job at doing the most with that. Simply put, just try this game out. Even if you're not that interested in the franchise, this is a fun, cute JRPG which I think anyone can have a good time with. Can you believe it's been almost a year since I covered Danganronpa on this channel? Crazy, right? I went from having no idea what I was getting into and unsure of what I'd actually end up liking, all the while still recovering from COVID at the time, to it becoming my overnight obsession for months on end, playing and platinuming every game, loving mostly everything and eagerly awaiting whatever may come next. Danganronpa has become a staple franchise to me that I can recommend to anyone out to solve a murder mystery with a crazy cast. If you're a Phoenix Wright fan and ever wondered what it'd be like if it was just way crazier, then look no further. But for my money, Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair is the peak of the franchise here. Each main entry has at least 15 central characters to worry about, just for about half of them to not be that interesting or just plain unlikable. That is not the case for Danganronpa 2, which of its 16 main characters, only 2 of them were slightly below the mark for me. Everyone else was near perfection, easily memorable, multi-layered, great fun, with deep backstories. Learning about each face we met, understanding what they're fighting for, and then solving their murders one by one was never as refined as it was here, and I'd argue hasn't been replicated since. Each case requires a lot of extra thought and planning to solve, without ever going overboard or expecting you to make mental leaps of faith to answer, but equally don't give you everything on a silver platter. Solving these mysteries in the visual novel styled courtrooms with mini-games scattered throughout to test the brain, while an absolute bop of a soundtrack keeps you focused or anxious in the background. If you've ever wanted to get invested in a mystery, there's few better choices than this. Do I really need to say anything else? Is it really of any surprise to anyone else that, of course, my pick for Game of the Year that didn't come out this year is Blue Reflection Second Light? Do I really need to add anything more here? If you've been with the channel a little while, then you already know that this little game about empathy has become one of my all-time favourite pieces of media, full stop. A cast of characters I fell deeply in love with, a beautiful piano and violin focused OST, breathtaking locations, and a large, unreserved and honest beating heart. I'd honestly rather just let this game speak for itself, just Please, try it out, would you? But now it's on to the list that more of you might be curious about. My top 5 games that actually came out this year, my games of 2022. We actually did pretty well this year in a lot of ways, with both AA and AAA getting a good haul that pleased many. Except Callisto Protocol, that was a little rough. But I digress, for me, these 5 are the ones that stuck out the most. I won't pretend that Soul Hackers 2 is somehow perfect or belonging on any real list usually, as it's got some grindy dungeons, a story that's only interesting at the start and ending, a lack of focus in places, and in general just doesn't have the polish one would expect from an Atlus title. But I kinda loved it anyway. It's a turn-based JRPG set in a very vibrant sci-fi world, with demons walking amongst the people and 2 rival clans fighting over a war that will surely end the world. It's got a setup I jived with, a great soundtrack to boot. Being someone who grew up with slower and grindier RPGs as a kid, the work you do in Soul Hackers 2 was familiar to me, so I found it easy to adjust. But what really pulled me in and kept me invested was Ringo, the main character and first voiced Atlus character in Way Too Long to Count. Her personality as an AI in a human body learning the world as she solves the mysteries of the ongoing war just had me grinning from ear to ear anytime she spoke. From her sass to crude understandings to her alcoholism. She's a goofball, but she's my goofball. The game took me around 50 hours, but I know most of that was grinding away for levels and money. When I wasn't doing that though, I was enjoying side quests that contain mini-stories, exploring the city, or triggering a bunch of optional conversations to get closer to my crew, which would ultimately earn them new skills. I just wish the game sold better because I love the ideas this game poses, but it just needed some more money or time into it to really perfect the craft. As it stands, it's a really fun game with flaws, but it still left me with a goofy smile many a time throughout. Speaking of goofy, sometimes you need a dumb fun game to switch your head off to just blast through with a fun and energetic story. With a gameplay formula that blatantly takes cues from Devil May Cry, Samurai Maiden was a surprise hit of the year for me. A small team with a huge passion for their work surprised me with a Yuri love story interwoven into 16th century Japan demon slaying, and it strangely works. The cast all have unique abilities to add to the main character's arsenal. You can upgrade your equipment, earn new skills to fight tougher foes with style, push for better mission ranks to boast about, then go on a date with Io and tell ghost stories for a while. I also appreciated that the game was actually respectably hard. Not overwhelming, but there were a number of boss fights that took me several attempts to beat, and some levels had quite a lot of encounters that could shear main character Tsumugi's health apart in only a couple hits. And that's ignoring that upon completion, you unlock hard mode, and upon beating that, Tsumugi must despair mode. All in all, it's cute and cool at the same time, and wasn't something I expected to click with me as much as it did. I hesitate to put it any higher, however, because the game is still extremely fresh to me, so it's hard to say how I'll feel once the initial buzz for it dies down, but for now, rock on Samurai Maiden! You know that disclaimer I made where I said even if a game is technically better than what I place above it, it's because I just personally enjoyed it more and not that I think it's technically better? Well, Elden Ring is number 3, so now you understand why I made that disclaimer. It's hard to say anything new that hasn't already been said, so I'll keep it brief. It redefined what open world means, had extremely deep and interconnected lore, some of the most interesting bosses from software I've ever made. It never once holds your hands, and in general continues to hide surprises that I'm still finding to this very day. Elden Ring is a modern masterpiece and earned every single one of the awards it has been given. But once the dust had settled, there just so happened to be 2 games that happened to tick the box in my heart a teeny tiny bit more than this. I alluded to this in my previous list, but of course Atelier Sophie 2 was gonna be here. Tying up the last loose ends of the wonderful saga, while also being a fresh new installment with wonderful characters, a beautiful world, and soundtrack that feels like a worthy successor to Sophie 1, and easily the best combat system in an Atelier game. I loved every second of my time here. The bosses are the only low point and what stopped it from being my number 1, but I can't stress enough, everything else makes that somewhat null and void. The character writing will make you cry, the story will make you gasp, the music is sick as always, and god damn it, did I say I love the cast already? Sophie as a character is one of the most endearing characters I've ever experienced in gaming, and her growth from a teen finding her way after losing their grandmother to a mature, if a bit silly, adult she becomes is just heartwarming. It's an JRPG with style, and one that made my heart race too many times to count. No, it's not better than Elden Ring on a technical level, but man did this game do everything I wanted for my soul and is a symbol of why I love video games to begin with. Thank you, Atelier Sophie 2. I want you to picture a scenario. You're a fan of a franchise that you've seen grow since you were a child. With every new entry, you learned more about the world, the characters, and the narrative bringing it together. You love these stories, love these faces, and are always excitedly awaiting the next chapter. But then, it stumbles. It pushes away from what you love, and for the next 14 years of your life, it never quite hits the same. Then, once you're completely pessimistic, have no hope for the future of the franchise, and honestly, just wish it would end, as the memories you have are enough, a miracle happens. A new entry releases, and it's everything the child inside you have always wanted. It ties the story back around, further grows the cast, enhances the experience, and rewards your commitments with connections to the entire universe and legacy of the franchise, reminding you why you loved it to begin with. Once you've got all of that in your mind, you'll then begin to understand what Sonic Frontiers is to me. This game feels as though it was handcrafted for me specifically. The characters, the vast world littered with creative and fun things to do, the insane soundtrack ranging from soft pianos and lo-fi fishing tunes to crazy orchestral rock or straight up heavy metal. The new gameplay systems and upgrade paths letting you express yourself through Sonic in ways you've never been able to do before, cyberspace levels to really test your speed with, some of the most insane boss fights I've ever seen in my life that I will not spoil, as they have to be seen yourself to truly understand, and ultimately, a clear and beautiful promise for the future. Sonic Frontiers is a victory, and that one that caused me to weep tears of immense joy once it was over. And that's it. I know I kept it kinda simple, but I didn't want this video to go on if I could help it. If you're at all curious what my list would have been for my anticipation list, well, most of it would be obvious, but Ryza 3, Final Fantasy 16, Tekken 8, Street Fighter 6, Theater Rhythm, and SpongeBob Cosmic Shake are the main ones sitting on that list right now. Which order, and that's debatable depending on the mood. But if you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. It genuinely really helps spread the word a little and get my name more out there. My Twitter is in the description of every video, as is my Patreon, which any donations will go into hopefully making all of this a little better. From my mic, to my setup, to what I get to play and how much content I can make. But regardless, thank you for watching this all the way through, and thank you for putting up with me for a whole year. Take care, guys. Peace.